In this video you will learn the polar bear system, which is a very flexible opening system that will allow you to have many chances to win as white. The polar bear system is a universal system for playing as white, which consists of playing like in the Leningrad variation of the Dutch defense but with the colors reversed. The Leningrad variation of the Dutch defense is a very dynamic variation, which allows black to play for a win. After the main moves, a very dynamic position is usually reached in which black has several typical plans. He can develop his queen's knight to the a6 square, so as not to obstruct the action of the bishop on c8. Or he can also develop the knight to d7, to support the e5 advance and strengthen control of the center. Black can support this advance moving his queen to e8. In addition, black can look for opportunities to attack on the kingside, with moves such as knight h5 and f4. These plans may vary depending on how white responds, but in general, black seeks a balance between control of the center and activity on the kingside. Black has very good play. Therefore, it makes sense to try to play this same system of play but with the white pieces. And, therefore, with a time advantage. White starts the game with the move f4. Which is the bird opening. It is not a particularly good move, but it is perfectly playable and, in addition, it has the psychological effect that black can be surprised by this move. Now, black has many options. For example, in case of f5, white can play e4, an interesting gambit. White plays the From Gambit with the colors reversed. After f takes e4. White responds d3. And in case of e takes d3. White plays bishop takes d3 and is threatening queen h5 check, which would lead to checkmate. Black can play knight f6, to control the h5 square. White plays knight f3. The knight will in the future be able to jump to the g5 square, from where it will threaten to capture on h7 and create serious threats. After the move f4, black can reply with e6. White plays knight f3, developing his king's knight. And in case of f5, white can play e4. After f takes e4, white replies knight g5. After knight f6, to defend the e4 pawn, white plays d3. And after e takes d3, white replies bishop takes d3. And white has very good attacking chances. For example, now it would be a serious mistake to play h6, to try to expel the white knight. Since white plays bishop g6 check. And after king e7. White plays knight f7 and wins. After the move f4, black can reply with c6. White plays knight f3, developing his king's knight. Black can play d5, placing a pawn in the center. White can play d3, with the idea of preparing the move e4. Black can reply with knight f6, increasing his control over the e4 square. White can play c3, and now it would be a mistake to play bishop g4, with the idea of capturing on f3 and weakening white's pawns. Since white can play knight e5, attacking the enemy bishop. After, for example, bishop f5 to defend the bishop. White can play e4, gaining a tempo by attacking the enemy bishop. Now, it would be a mistake to play d takes e4. Since white plays queen b3 creating a double threat on f7 and b7. After e6, to avoid checkmate. White moves on to queen takes b7, creating a deadly double threat again. After knight b to d7, black seems to be defending himself. However, white plays knight c6, attacking the opponent's queen. After queen c8. White exchanges queens and after rook takes c8. White plays knight takes a7. The black rook is attacked and white can play d4 to consolidate his position and secure his advantage. For example, in case of rook a8, to attack the knight. White plays knight b5 and threatens to give check on c7. So, black has no time to capture on d3. After rook b8, attacking the knight again. White plays d4, defending his knight and is much better off. After the move f4, black can play knight c6, developing the queen's knight. White plays knight f3, developing the king's knight. Black can play d5, placing a pawn in the center. White can play e3, taking control of the dark squares in the center. If black plays bishop g4, white can respond with bishop b5, with the idea of capturing on c6 and weakening black's queenside pawns. White can continue with moves like b3, bishop b2, etc. and has a position similar to the Nimzo Indian defense with the colors reversed and has a very good game. Another possibility for white after the move f4 is g6, with the idea of developing the king's bishop by Fianchetto. White plays knight f3, developing his king's knight. After bishop g7, white can play g3, continuing his development scheme. His idea is to develop the king's bishop on the g2 square and place the pieces as in the Leningrad variation of the Dutch defense, but with the colors reversed. If now black plays d6, white answers bishop g2, developing his king's bishop and preparing to castle. After knight f6, white plays d3, preparing to place his pawn on e4. Black can castle. White can castle. And after c5, white can play e4, placing a pawn in the center, and the closed variation of the Sicilian defense has been reached. After the move f4, black can respond with e5, the From Gambit. White can respond with e4, entering the king's gambit. Or he can also accept the gambit by capturing on e5. After d6, white captures on d6. And after bishop takes d6, black threatens queen h4 check, which would lead to mate. After knight f3, white can continue with g3 and bishop g2 and has good play. After the move f4, the best response for black is probably d5, placing a pawn in the center. White can play knight f3, developing his king's knight. Now, black plays bishop g4, with the idea of capturing on f3, to weaken white's pawns. White can play e3, to avoid his pawns being doubled. After knight d7, black wants to play e5. White can play h3, attacking the bishop. Now bishop h5 is not possible, since after g4, bishop g6. White plays f5 and the black bishop is lost. So, after the move h3, black has to capture on f3. And after queen takes f3, white has very good play. After the move knight f3, black can develop his king's knight to the f6 square. White plays g3, continuing his development system. Black can play g6, with the idea of developing his king's bishop by Fianchetto. White continues with bishop g2, developing his king's bishop and preparing to castle. Black can play bishop g7, developing his king's bishop and preparing to castle. White can castle. Black can castle. White can play d3, taking control of the e4 square. Black can play c5, to increase his control over the central squares. White can respond c3, keeping his position flexible. Black can play knight c6, developing his queen's knight. A typical position has been reached, reminiscent of the Leningrad variation of the Dutch defense but with the colors reversed. From here on, white can develop his queen's knight to the a3 square, so as not to obstruct the action of the bishop on c1. Or he can also develop the knight to d2, to support the e4 advance and strengthen control of the center. White can support this advance, moving his queen to e1. In addition, white can look for opportunities to attack on the kingside, with moves such as knight h4 and f5. These plans may vary depending on how black responds, but in general, white seeks a balance between control of the center and activity on the king side. White has very good play. In the following video we will study a masterful game in which we will see how white can fight for the advantage.